Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Well, welcome everybody to Curiosity Invited, and I have the great pleasure of speaking with Dan Burrier today, and who is an interesting fellow, as you shall see. In some ways, he feels like an old friend, and yet we don't know each other well, but we know each other for a long time, sort of tangentially. We met when Nick Burrier, Dan's son, was a student at a school I was working at years ago, and New Road School, and Dan is an interesting fellow, and I'm so pleased that you agreed. So welcome, Dan. And I'm going to start by doing something boring, and this could be all wrong and out of date. Mm-hmm. But it was the best thing I found on the internet. So you can correct me for all these things. So Dan Burrier, it has you listed here as an executive director of, and I'm assuming this came from Mentora. But here, I'll read what it says, and then we can get the real bio right from you. So Dan is a branding and leadership strategist, writer, speaker, and ordained Zen priest. That's not a combination you find a lot. A lifelong student of human nature, technology, and marketing, Dan's been able to apply the learnings in a variety of business settings. Clients that he has served, this was for Mentora, include the Harlem Children's Zone, the Holdworth Center, MetLife, Kantar, and Tata Consulting Services. Prior to that, he served as a worldwide creative director on Apple Incorporated, for Apple Incorporated at BBDO, co-president, chief creative officer, and chief innovative officer at Ogilvy and Mather, and CEO of Common. He's guided brand and organizational behavior, marketing, positioning, and messaging for Apple, IBM, Motorola, Cisco Systems, communities and schools. It just goes on and on. In his spare time, if there is any, well, there's more now. Dan interweaves his duty as husband, father, surfer, ultra marathoner, and student of Zen. And I'm enormously pleased that you agreed to speak to me. And truth be told, what most intrigued me and why I reached out to you is that unless I just didn't know it, the Dan Burrier I knew a bit when he was parent of Nick was not a Zen priest. And then I got a newsletter or two, and it was, wait, that's Dan Burrier. And that was very intriguing. So before do you want to say anything more about your bio before we?
Yeah, let me jump in there. First, David, I appreciate the nod to the French etymology of the name, but we usually say Burrier.
Burrier.
Yeah, just Burrier. Very American. I don't mind the Burrier, but somebody out there might be going, wow, that's fancy. And then the other thing is I'm happy to talk about my time at Mentora because it's a fabulous organization. But, I did stop working with them earlier this year to focus wholly and completely on the Zen practice and Prajnaheart Zen Center here in Los Angeles and Yokoji Zen Mountain Center in the mountains above Los Angeles near Idlewild. And I was a priest when you knew me.
Really?
So we can wow. Cover that.
Did you keep that under wraps, or was it?
Yeah. No, but it does raise an interesting point just about how you walk in the world, right?
Yeah, indeed. And well, can I ask you questions before we get to any of who you are now? Who were you then? How'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up? What was your family like? Were you religious?
No, no. And I often will jest about, like, how did a kid from a Sputnik family from Albuquerque, New Mexico end up being fortunate to do a lot of the things I've been able to do, and even more than that, end up in ancient Japanese robes, chanting liturgy in a zendo.
Hmm.
I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Was not there that long, just really long enough. My mother, there was no public kindergarten at the time. So my fond memories of my mother and I doing a TV kindergarten show, and she made me a little desk and we did that together on the floor. And I went to first grade in Albuquerque and Syracuse, New York, and San Jose, California.
Wow.
My father worked for IBM, and he was bouncing around at that point in time. And then we landed in Los Angeles, down in Hawthorne, for second through seventh grade, and then Torrance through most of high school. Moved to Dallas, Texas, halfway through my junior year in high school, which was like, oh my God, I thought I was going to die. And but when you show up in Dallas, Texas as a soccer player and a surfer, all of a sudden I had status I didn't have out here. And then just quickly to run through all of that, then I hightailed it back to California for university at UC San Diego, so University of California, San Diego, where I majored in electrical and engineering and computer science, minored in English literature. And
So of course, marketing was the place to be.
that was accidental too.
Yeah.
I mean, what is accident? But neither of my parents were college educated. They saw college as more of a vocational track than anything. Very early on, I had wanted to be a writer, and we can talk about that if you want. But so I was doing this very practical computer science degree, which positioned me great for the timing of where Silicon Valley and all of that was going. But I really wanted to write, so I threw in the English literature and minored there, and then talked my way into grad school at the University of Washington in English lit. Got married, moved up there, and so really exercised that side of things until I ran out of money and realized I didn't want to be a literature professor. And I'm not sure which of those was most important, but running out of money certainly had something to do with it.
Yes, it has an impact on things.
Yeah. But I mean, in university, I didn't have a television. I really shunned business and saw it as a evil force, at that point in time, and kind of from that idealistic college student point of view, and knew nothing about marketing or advertising at all. When I ran out of money in Seattle, I reached out to people I knew at IBM because I had done internships there through college, and with my writing desire and my technical knowledge, I started ghostwriting research articles for this research lab, Los Gatos Research Lab, where I had worked doing some programming during college. And so that was the first thing where I combined the two. And then I met a couple of graphic designers in Seattle through a freelance gig I had at, what was the name of it? Like Cubic Corporation, which was a defense contractor. And we formed a little business, little design and communications business in a 180 square foot office above REI in Seattle. Yeah. And so that was then the first time I really even started to see that side of the business, working with a couple of visual creative professionals. And, things grew from there, but it was
I-
it was interesting. So as you said, well, perfect for marketing, but I had no idea. I
yeah,
had no
well,
idea.
and I
Yeah.
was actually, my tongue might have been in my cheek. I
Yeah.
was like, well, how does somebody who studies engineering and writing go to marketing? And of course, it turns out that's exactly what they need. Translators, really.
Well, and that was the joy in it for me
Yeah.
is like, how do you take things that can seem very arcane and inaccessible
Hmm.
and bring it to life in a way that people can understand and in the best of cases be inspired by,
Right.
you know.
And was it then was it in that time that you sort of that the business is evil um, perspective started to sort of get sanded away, or did you
Yeah, I guess
instantly?
no, I guess rubbed away, sanded away
Yeah,
is kind of a nice way to
yeah,
put it, because of course all of a sudden I found myself in the middle of it. Now, there were some interesting moments, like I was, at this you know what, I've got it wrong. That was Data IO in Seattle. Okay, there, let me step back
yeah.
just a little bit, because in my final year of college at UC San Diego, I took a job at Cubic Corporation, which was the defense
Got
contract.
it.
And I did well, and I kept getting raises, and I didn't understand why. And I really that was the first time I kind of hit this little wall of, well, okay, this is working in a material way, but it's not working for me,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I went in one Friday and said, I appreciate everything. You keep giving me more money, but I need to quit. And they said, when? And I said, Monday. And they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I want to write. And they said, you can't do that. And I said, well, I'm going to give it a shot. But that was like that first test of like, where do these worlds collide and where do I fit in them? I was working on programming and building a defense or foe detector, or did defense or foe training computer that would train naval personnel to use a piece of equipment which was a defense or foe detector, basically a fancy radar with all kinds of
Right.
computing for,
Right. Right.
and I was just kind of like, well, it's the technology is cool, but like, this is not what I want to be doing.
Wow.
And it was a very specific culture, and so I left that. So that's going back.
Yeah.
The Seattle part, um, certainly I just started seeing the application of technology in different ways through business, but there was not ever, I don't know, David, whether I really ever completely, you know, uh, took the Kool-Aid on business,
Mm.
or ever really had a violent, like, oh, this is indeed evil. Like,
Right.
at this point in the journey, I don't feel that way at all.
Right.
I mean, I see problems and
Yeah.
and opportunities on all sides of
Right.
these things.
Yeah.
People,
I
the
think
people.
for I think for me it was because I absolutely grew up in, I think, probably a similar vintage,
Yeah,
and there was that sense in college, especially, that there was something. Business was the source of things, not the only one, but the source of things bad
yeah,
in the world, and ideology. The hope for a better world was not in the business world,
right,
and then bumping into and interacting with and and helping or being helped by people in that world, and suddenly it's like, well, wait a second,
yeah,
I'm meeting a lot of really nice, good people who struggle with some of the same questions that that are floating around my mind, and they don't seem bad, and they seem to be trying to solve problems, and not all, obviously, and not all in ways that I loved, but it was that sort of the rubbing away
Yeah.
of those ideas and the morphing into something else. So I
Well, and
do
I think
get it.
there's a common thread there, or that I can trace through this is when you start seeing through these labels and definitions and connecting with people as people, you find that, other than a few sociopaths and psychopaths out there,
Right,
most people want to improve things. They want a world that's better for their children or families.
right,
And then they have different views about how to go about that,
right.
you know. And if you really are able to connect at that level, then I think you can start getting some work done. That's of course really true in my Buddhist practice, but I find that to be true in business and just in life. And my success in the marketing and advertising world, I would really pin on that, was the ability to start seeing into our own motivations, hopes, desires, fears, and connect with people on that basis, which breaks down a lot of barriers.
When did the interest in Buddhism, and how did the interest in Buddhism arise? Did you grow up in a religious household of any
No.
sort?
I mean, I was certainly raised in a Christian context, the cultural container of Christianity. My
Yeah,
mother is half Italian, half Irish, Catholic family of
and all
eight
Catholic.
kids. Yeah,
Right.
eight, family of 8 kids out of Melrose Park, Illinois.
Yeah.
You know, my dad, on the other hand, was a single child and born in Ponca City, Oklahoma, and his family did not have a religious context to it. I would say that my mom's probably wasn't strong either, but they were a Catholic family and they went to church and they did all of that stuff.
Right.
We were raised, we sang Christmas carols and, knew everything from, Santa Claus is coming to town to hallelujah, so
Right.
kind of
Sure.
running the secular to the sacred in the carols, and did that, but we did not go to church. And, we talked about the college years of, rejecting any notion that there could be anything good in business, but that certainly was my point of view about anything religious as well. I held that. We've oft heard expression that, religion is, for those that need it,
Right.
and
Sure.
that kind of intellectual superiority of, well, I'm a scientific thinking person, I don't
Yes.
need to
Right.
rely on that.
Right.
The opiate of the masses. I took that hook, line, and sinker. Pretty much declared myself an atheist, if not an agnostic, in a general sense. And so, no, other than cultural and societal and historical family, I did not grow up with that at all. In fact, really, rejected it.
Yeah. Interesting that that's the sign.
I know. Yeah, let's do the cross. Yeah. Which way do I turn that? And
Yeah,
hopefully I didn't just make the sign of the devil of
Uh-oh.
also or something.
so so then where did this interest in Buddhism
Well, you're going to love this because
spring up?
you're going to love this because you know our son, Nick. When we were in New York City, this is well before you met any of us, right? We're in New York City and Nick was probably 7 years old. One of his classmates brought I think it was mother, to a sharing in the classroom. This was at St. Anne's in Brooklyn, really progressive, wonderful
Yeah.
school. And because they were studying Japan, they were doing no plays and haiku
Hmm.
and Japanese history. And so this parent came in, and she was with Fire Lotus Zen Center in Brooklyn, which is a sister center to Zen Mountain Monastery in Mount Tremper, New York, near Woodstock. And Nick came back from school that day and said, I want to go to the Zen Center on Sunday. He's 7 years old, right? And we're like, okay, we try to be good supportive parents, right?
Sure,
So
sure.
we go over to Fire Lotus Zen Center, and they run this 45-minute introduction to Zen training, which now I do for lots of people. And we did that, and then you go into like formal service with chanting and all of that, and then zazen or sitting meditation and all of that, and then a dharma talk. When you do all of that, it ends up being about 3.5 hours on a
Yeah,
Saturday morning.
I've done
And
it, so I know.
yeah, but now imagine 7-year-old Nick sitting on the other side of the Zendo all by himself, not with us, and like we're getting a little fidgety, and here's a 7-year-old like sitting there doing zazen. And
Wow.
so that was my first introduction. Lori, who did grow up with a church-based family, was like, oh, this is way too formal and too much like church for me. And it did not take. And Nick and I went a few more times, but life just carried us different
Sure.
directions.
It was the next unit in school, so who knows?
Yeah, it was next in school. So, but anyway, it was interesting because that was the first hint of at least Zen Buddhism. Earlier in my Seattle days, I had this sense that there was something other than what I knew. And so I looked into meditation and different meditation techniques and Tibetan Buddhism and kind of Eastern philosophy and religion, and did the reading around it and tried to meditate on my own. I remember sitting there north of the University of Washington in my house going, okay, I'm supposed to be following my breath. I'm supposed to be following my breath. And, so there were hints of things here and there, but anyway, back to New York City after this experience at the Zen Center. And this is my advertising career in New York was going full tilt. And Lori and Nick and I were at the dinner table one night. And I'm not sure why I asked the question, but out of my mouth, there's the three of us at the table, I asked the question, am I becoming mean?
Am I becoming meaningless?
Mean.
Mean.
MEAN, mean. Am I becoming mean? And there was this slight pause, and both Lori and Nick in unison said yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's gotta like be a punch in the stomach.
It was
Wow.
a punch in the stomach.
And do you have insight into where that question came from now? You may not have then, but
yeah, I think that I can be very competitive, and certainly I was in a competitive business and doing quite well with it. And I guess I also just had the sense that I was losing any accurate measurement of my life, and the way I've cast that is success became my only measure of success.
right.
And that it just didn't feel, it just wasn't sitting quite right.
Right.
It's like go, 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 win. But to what end? And I think the more idealistic younger Dan, who wanted to be a writer, really always had this, and this perhaps sounds grandiose, but let's talk about it from a 19, 20-year-old's point of view, that aren't we supposed to use everything we've got to change the world, to make a better world, and I think that always stayed with me somewhere at a subterranean level. And so
Hmm.
even with all the, I mean, advertising, a great profession and great career and a lot of fun. And we can talk about that some more and the chance to shape the world in certain ways. Um, but personally, I just started having some unease and out popped that question.
Well, to me, that's super interesting because you're not pointing at the people you were doing the work for or the companies or their goals. You're pointing at yourself there in terms of what was dissatisfying. It wasn't that you were, trying to create a brand that would sell more, God knows what, gasoline, which you
Right.
knew was damaging the planet or whatever it was, or more hamburgers, which I don't know, something that was dissonant to your own values or what you knew about the world. You were saying it was you.
Yeah.
That world was fine, but there was something about how you were in it,
Yeah. And
how you were
where
not in it, that that yeah,
and what I
that's
was going to do with it.
yes.
And
Yeah.
what I was going to do with it.
Hmm.
And whether that was true to that younger self that was still there,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel, I mean, it was not that young at that point, but
Sure.
but I feel fortunate to have asked the question at that point in time. And and I didn't really even have an answer to it. It's not like I was like, okay, I got to go find God, or I
Yeah.
need to go back to the Zen center, or I need to
What was
go
the
into
rest of that dinner like? Do you have any memory? Like, what do you, what's the next thing that gets said after? Yeah,
I think there's
you're
some
kidding
I
me.
think there's some silence and then some
Pass the
washing.
peas.
Yeah, exactly. And then some washing of dishes. And
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, even I've retold this story a few times. But yeah, that gut punch, I can still feel it.
Sure.
And it's like, who wants to hear that from those of you closest to you?
Right. Who know you best, closest, to care most about, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. Hmm.
Yeah. So then things moved along, and I was offered the opportunity to come out to the West Coast to head up the creative at Ogilvy and Mather in Los Angeles, head up the creative side of it. And, discussions back and forth. But anyway, that ended up happening. And we got out here to Los Angeles, and Nick was 9 at that point. Was immediately is that was the summer after 9/11. So we were in Brooklyn, for 9/11.
Mhm.
And that, of course, had a profound effect on a lot of us globally. But Lori and I, when we landed in Los Angeles at this point in time after all of that, and I mean, we had a conversation about, are we going to raise Nick? Is our family going to just continue motoring along, as the three of us, and succeeding where we succeed and fail where we fail? Or, do we want to have any community, that's bigger than just the three of us, and
Mhm.
that is not just school based. School is a strong community, but
Sure.
and Lori said, I think there's a Zen center in Santa Monica. We were living in Santa Monica. Maybe we should go check it out. And that was Santa Monica Zen Center, and that was 2002. And we went in and did that same instruction we had done in Fire Lotus Zen Center in Brooklyn. And that morning, it took,
Hmm.
and that was really where what I'm doing now really took. I remember sitting there, and Zazen, the meditation in the Zen tradition is all about awakening, being awake and aware, and right in the moment. And I remember sitting there, I think I was 41 or 42 years old, and seeing really for the first time that there was a self that was not defined in the way that I had usually defined myself, and that my thoughts and my thinking mind were not it.
Mhm.
And that was maybe I'm just a slow learner and that's obvious to everyone else, but for me it was a
I think
major
that's true.
for me it was a major revelation, and hugely freeing, because then all of a sudden my mind and my thoughts and that thinking part of me became a tool rather than me becoming a tool of it.
Mhm.
And that was Sunday. I showed up the next Tuesday at 5 a.m. for Don Zazen, and then next Thursday at 5 a.m. And I just kept going. And a lot of things were revealed to me that I had not previously seen, and a way of seeing the world and people that I hadn't known. And it was so profound that I was like, well, I'm going to keep going. And then, discovered that I had a desire and some aptitude for sharing it. So then I started doing the same introduction that I had been introduced to. And so that was 2002. In 2005, I received the precepts, which is when you formally become a Zen Buddhist. And the precepts are a lot like the 10 Commandments, but you just basically vow to live your life, practicing those, failing and practicing and coming back to the center. And then 2007, I took vows as a novice priest in a ceremony called Tokido. And then I was fully ordained in 2012.
And I mean, one has to make a choice to do that, or is it if you keep driving down this road, everybody ends up there, or you
Mm,
have to make, in other words, like someone can, I mean, I think I've had friends who are, by the way, I meditate daily. My
yeah.
wife and I meditate daily and have for years, but and been to numerous Zen uh sessions.
Yes.
Um and I know I've had friends who have practiced Zen, and I'm assuming Zen Buddhism, but for years, but they never spoke about sort of heading towards being a priest. So there's a choice at some point to do this, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because there are many, many devoted, or committed, practitioners who meditate
Yes.
every day, like as you do. Many people have been practicing Zen for much longer than I have, for example, and it's part of their lives and a context for their lives. But yeah, they don't need to, or don't have the desire or calling to put on robes and do that. A word about the word priest,
Yeah,
because
please.
it's a big word.
Yeah,
For me, it's
it's one of those questions I had written down. So what's that mean?
yeah. For me, it's always been, there are certain things about being a priest. Obviously, there's an archetype, and do weddings and funerals and run things and stuff like that. But for me, it was always really more, I felt called to share this thing that I had seen, and and to where I could point the way so that somebody else might be able to experience
Mm-hmm.
this,
Mm-hmm.
experience this view, which for me was much more expansive and much more loving and much more able to contain all of the things that the world is, rather than just my beliefs around what it should be or is.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the progression through the different stages of ordination, and now, as a Dharma holder, a teacher, um, was a desire to share and teach. And I think as an educator, you probably understand
Yeah,
that impulse.
totally.
And I don't think it's that different from when you see the light go on in a child's eyes to where you see a child or an adult, that
Yeah.
little glimmer of light go on is like, oh, wait a minute, here's a different way to walk through the world. And it's all not all predicated and managed by what I think and what I believe,
Hmm.
and even what I imagine. That there are some truths out there that are more universal and larger than this little me here. So the progression through this has always for me been about that spark in a child's eyes.
Right. Right. I get it. And so you become a priest, and then priests of different religions, they have a congregation, or they start a church, or they are assigned to a church, or how does that work in the Zen tradition? So
Yes.
you're ordained as a priest, and now you're
Well,
assigned someplace, or
no, it's not exactly like that. It doesn't track exactly like that. So a lot of Zen centers will have a number of ordained priests
yes,
or nuns, monks and nuns,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
I mean, the traditional word would be monks and nuns, but there aren't that many monastic centers, in the U.S. So then
right,
priest kind of takes the place of that, and priest has more of an officiant quality to that. But there are many of us that take the vows and put on the robes and just serve, within the context of the center that we find ourselves in, or travel to, or the teacher
yeah,
we're working with, because
mhm,
you almost always have a teacher. My teacher is Tenshin Roshi at Zen Mountain Monastery right now, that I'm still in training with. So there are many priests that continue just to operate within that context. If you continue on and receive full Dharma transmission, which means that it really puts you on the lineage chart from Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, all the way through the generations, and then all of a sudden there you are. At that point, usually people then strike out and form, if not just a sitting group, then a center, or start working with people and building a sangha or community similar to a congregation.
mhm,
And that way the practice spreads out.
right,
um, for me, Santa Monica was the obvious next step, was to continue on and perhaps run that at some point in time. But we hit an inflection point as a Zen center there, where there needed to be a reset. I certainly hit an inflection point in my life, and Lori did too. And that's when we decided to retreat for a while, if you want to call it that, to a farm in northern New Mexico.
well, that was unexpected. I thought you were going to tell me where you are right now, but no.
No, we maybe you didn't know that, but we spent 6 years in northern New Mexico, in Abiquiu, New Mexico,
Oh,
Georgia,
wow,
Georgia O'Keeffe country.
yeah,
And we had a little 20-acre plot, and we grew hay for a few horses and garlic that we sold at market and to neighbors. And
that's a different life.
yeah, we went out there to contemplate and reflect on everything, and where we were and where we were going, and to fulfill a dream that Lori and I had always had from our very first date, our first overnight date in Vancouver, BC, where we both expressed a desire someday to have some land and grow stuff.
Oh, wow.
So when Nick was just about finished with college, we said, and this was right in this 2012 time, so about 10 years ago, where we were like, is this just going to be a dream that we always talk about, or are we going to do it? And that also marked my exit from the advertising industry. So left advertising, left Los Angeles, and went out to play guitar and meditate and grow stuff in New Mexico. And that damn guitar sat there, never opened for 6 years.
That's because growing stuff takes a lot of time.
I have a profound appreciation for the work of farmers and ranchers.
Unbelievable.
It's just what a life.
Unbelievable.
Beautiful and hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're on the farm for 6 years, and then you decide, well, we'll never really be farmers. So
that's an interesting way to put it. I remember one time on the driveway where Lori said, "You're not a farmer." What are you doing? I mean, I did win blue ribbons at the county fair with our garlic.
With the garlic?
Fabulous. Yeah. There was my garlic right next to my mentor's garlic, Bill Page. And he was a proud mentor, you know.
That's great.
But yeah, there did come to that point, and we still have fabulous friends and sense of community with the Northern New Mexico Abiquiu folk out there. But we did eventually reach a point where we felt called to come back and do this work. There were a number of things. Lori's was still coming back and forth from LA, and her landscape design business was doing quite well. And
she still kept that up in Los Angeles while you were there?
Not at first, but then she just found herself wanting to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and then I remember one evening we were on our way down to Santa Fe, and she said, "I think I really want to see how far I can take this." And I said, "Well, I will support that. You know, you've certainly supported a lot of my foolishness.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah. All right.
why not support something wise?" And the retreat part of being out on the farm, it was interesting because after some time, stuff just started cropping up. Like our land had been used for ceremony throughout time. And so Lakota shaman and a group of people asked if they could do a sweat on our land. So that was one side of things. Lori did a wedding there by the riverside. I was asked to do a memorial service for a local resident, a wonderful woman from San Francisco that had walked many paths. So I ended up doing a memorial service side by side with a Catholic priest. And he led the meditation and I led the prayer.
Oh, wow.
It was kind of fun. And so this side of things started cropping up again. I had started my work with Mentora at the time. You asked about that earlier.
Yes.
And so that had me increasingly on planes to Europe and India and New York City. And
could you just do a nutshell about what that is and then go back to the...
Sure. The Mentora Institute, it originally was called the Institute for Personal Leadership, was founded by Professor and PhD Hitendra Wadhwa out of Columbia University. And it still does operate, you know, tangentially with Columbia. But it was an organization that Hitendra founded to develop the next generation of leaders. My words, not his words, heart-based leaders, but really developing people as leaders where they were operating from a place of their inner core, of inner wisdom, peace, and calm, and then able to access skills and tools of leadership in a way that would be effective, kind, and loving.
It's interesting that, you know, as I was looking through their website, nowhere did this may be incorrect, but it didn't use the term as far as I could see, but it felt like, well, how would I how would I describe what I just read to somebody? It's like, well, it's sort of a leadership. It's a leadership training or nurturing that is at its core spiritual. It didn't use that language.
No, it
Like,
didn't. And but it is interesting that you picked up on that. Uh, Hitendra has been a long time member and practitioner of the Self-Realization Fellowship.
mm, got it.
And certainly that practice informs him
Mm-hmm.
and inspired him to take this
Yeah.
path that's tact. Um, when you're working with large global corporations, some of them are open to that and some
Yeah.
of
Right.
them are
Yeah. It's
not.
not one of those words that
you know
a lot of people embrace.
yeah, you don't necessarily go out to everyone saying, devotees and disciples,
Yes. Right.
and you don't need to,
No.
because
Exactly.
Mentora is not hawking any spiritual or religious point of view, but
Right.
it is informed by a tradition that says if you go deep and explore your inner core, that is a beautiful and powerful place to operate from,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just the reactive leader that has skills and you're just throwing
Right.
skills around. But
Right.
where is that sourced, which is much like my question, when I began my whole path, is where am I sourcing
Yes. It's
this?
it's interesting. I was about to ask you. I think if absent that, and I'm not being cute, but absent that, it would seem like if you're if you're if you are a leader and actively engaged in leadership and climbing in the leadership ladders without at least some touchstone in that world, in that other world about whatever we call it, core, somebody asks you the question, like, am I being meaner? Am I getting
Yeah,
meaner? Right. I mean,
yeah,
because there's like, what do I have my finger on? Like, what am I hooked to?
yeah, you could
Yeah.
be seemingly highly effective,
Yeah.
but the winds of events can blow you around if you don't have that inner
Yes.
core. And we've seen some spectacular business meltdowns and leadership meltdowns in the last 5 years or so, particularly in some of the glamorous,
You
uh,
bet.
the Ubers and those
Yes.
sorts of businesses where there's been a crisis of leadership, really highly effective leadership, but how does it meet the test of the real pressure test of
Right.
change or chaos or upset. And I mean, that's why I spent so much time with Mentora. I think what Hitendra has put his finger on and is taking out to the world with a great team in New York, LA, New Delhi, and other parts of the world. I think it's really important work. And when Hitendra and I met in a workshop that I was running at the time, facilitating at the time, we instantly, it's kind of like eye to eye. Oh, okay, all right,
Yeah.
let's walk this together for a while, and
I think I don't want to cut you off. I think it's a super important work. I mean, I mean, good people I know who I even consider friends. I mean, I've had just happened 2 weeks ago. Uh, Somebody who is, I'm going to be obscure here. Somebody who, because I don't want to, I want to talk about him and he'll know, um, but he'll know anyway. But somebody who is running, founded and is running a wonderful organization that is trying to accomplish really useful, important political work, and and there have been several issues having to do with the employees' feelings, other executives' feelings about how they're treated. And the response or the attitude is like, well, it's not really a world where you can sort of sit around and sing kumbaya, which of course is immediately the dismissal that there's any value in connecting in a deep way, because right. And it's like, no, that's exactly what you need.
Yeah.
Maybe the song is dated, but that is exactly what you need.
Yeah.
It's that. So yeah.
Well said. So yeah, Mentora Institute, doing great work, and I would still be with them, except that I saw that it was time to up the ante yet again on the Zen practice, and really fulfill my role as a teacher, and build Prajna Heart Zen Center here in LA and Yokoji Zen Mountain Center up in Mountain Center. It was clear to me that it was time to commit fully to that. So the New Mexico thing, the kind of resurgence of that, and then my teacher at the time, Yoshin Roshi from Santa Monica Zen Center, kind of a little nudge. He said, like, maybe it's time to come back, and maybe it's time to do this. And so Lori and I came back, and with another co-founder, Melissa Mueller, founded Prajna Heart Zen Center here in Los Angeles. That was 2018. And we've been building that community, that Sangha, since. You've been the recipients of a weekly musing and newsletter from me in that journey. And then I also was connected. My teacher, Yoshin Roshi, saw that it was time for me to transition, and he connected me to Tenshin Roshi up at the Mountain Center. And so there was kind of a transfer of me as a student. And so now Prajna Heart Zen Center and I are operating under the guidance of Tenshin Roshi, and he and I are working very closely together. And I'm splitting my time between the two centers now, so pretty much half mountain, half city, and continuing on with my training to try to do my best and not mess things up too much along the way.
Well, maybe this is a silly question, or maybe it's too big a question, but so at a place where you are, you're already an ordained, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Zen priest.
Yeah.
What does more training look like?
Well, becoming a priest, I mean, there's some element of time and study in there, but in many ways it's commitment and taking the vows that this is how I will serve and this is how I will live my life. Becoming a fully certified teacher has a couple different levels to it, and that's beyond priests. So this is where there's a fairly strict curriculum, that you go through of koan study. There's 750 koans, Zen koans, and then just practicing, the running of a center and all of that, and your understanding, clarity, depth, and confidence of understanding being tested by your teacher continually before you're really handed the keys, to fully lead a community on your own. And I think it's a great process, because if the teachers are committed in the right way, my teacher Tenshin Roshi says, I want to make sure that you are really tried and tested before I unleash you on the world. you know and Yoshin Roshi before him too. So I said I'm a Dharma holder right now, so I am certified to teach, but that's not full Dharma transmission, which is really the final step that we're in now, and that happens or not happens at the discretion of my teacher. And here's the thing, David, you could go through the entire curriculum, and I've been doing this for 20 years now, but you could go through the curriculum and satisfy all the check boxes, but there's that final non-linear test of
Right. You turn off the machines and use the force. And
is this actually true?
right.
Is this person, this potential teacher, ready? And at that point you can be held back indefinitely, or you never receive transmission or receive transmission. And receiving transmission is literally the transmission of the teachings through generation of teacher to student to teacher to teacher to student, going all the way back to Buddha. And it's, let me tell you, that is daunting if you really look at that seriously, because this goes back to the kid from Albuquerque, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, no one could feel ready for that, right?
It's like, really,
Right.
So I'm grateful for the process, and I'm grateful for the testing that goes into it.
Do you have some insight into how going through this process has changed you? It's changed how you see, or
Yeah. I mean, the best evidence is always the people around you. But unless you want to go interview everybody, which you could.
No, I mean, I would love to speak to them both.
You go like, okay, I just spent
trust you.
I just spent 2 hours with this guy. Let's put the bullshit
He
meter
says
on.
He says he's okay. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to my time at Ogilvy. I found myself able to be with people and actually hear them, because I actually could open myself up to what was coming in rather than what I thought was going to happen. That, oh, here comes so-and-so again. I wonder if they're going to ask about this again, or, oh, I bet you they want this, or I bet you they want that, or someone's in pain about something, can you actually hear that? So as a manager in those days, as somebody driving creative forces, and then I later became co-president of the office, and then, you read that all off. I had some big business roles too. It really allowed me to be present to the person in front of me, and really hear and see what was going on, and then respond appropriately. It also allowed me to see larger problems with teams or clients or industries clearly, and then be able to pull in the forces and the people and the troops, and act accordingly, rather than formulaically. So my Zen practices, I did that. I mean, I would never promise this to anybody. It's not actually a goal of the practice, but it made me far more effective, and ultimately, I hate to use the word, but far more powerful, in that realm, because like I could clear a lot of the BS out of the way and start operating from what was actually so. So that was in that context. And then I was able to walk in and work with some of the CEOs of major corporations, and just actually be able to connect, at a very deep level around, why are you here? what do you want this company actually to stand for? When your people come in, what is going to motivate them? Like, what is it? What is it really about? Now, I was spoiled because I worked with technology a lot, and I had the great fortune to kind of say, no, I'm not going to do missiles, or no, I don't want to do cigarettes, and not everybody has those choices. But then when I came out to Los Angeles, I inherited an office of 100 and something people. And, we had Arco and AMPM and Mattel and Barbie. And, those were not companies or products that I would have handpicked. But all of a sudden I had people's lives and livelihoods in my hands, not just in the office, but in those companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was another moment where I had to rub right up against, okay, so where do you fall on this sword, sometimes false sword of ideology, and just go, I'm not going to do that? Or how do you serve within this context? And one thing that I held very close to me during those years was I realized that I was spending more time with all these people than they were spending with their families. And so I took it on. It was just kind of a personal intention to send people home in better shape than they arrived.
Mm.
So that was like a meta goal, and so that was one way in which I felt I could serve and express my Zen practice in this very commercial world. I don't know if you saw Dr. Paul Farmer just passed away today. He's the founder of Partners in Health. He's 62 years old and he died in his sleep.
No. Wow.
It really saddened me, and I found out right before we got on this interview. But he is. If you haven't read Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy Kidder, do pick it up. And I mention this because this was the book and the work of Dr. Paul Farmer had a profound influence on me in terms of my view of what it meant to be of service. His work was largely informed by liberation theology, which, the current Pope comes out of that tradition, which is, preferential option for the poor, really making sure. I'll pause for a moment while the door is. That had a profound effect on me. It's not Zen, but it certainly informed or it reignited that young man that was like, oh yeah, that's what this is about. Right. Really important story. So anyway, that like, how do I serve in this context? How do I serve in this context? I often say as in the effects of Zen, I mean, my biggest hope for the people that are studying with us and working with us is that they can fully and clearly express who they are, because we don't need another me, we don't need another you, we need everybody to be really turned on and using all of their talents and skills and spirit to tackle the tasks in front of us. So that I think the Zen practice definitely can unlock that, because when you start piercing, that armor of belief and opinion and thought, you can start finding out who you really are. And then if you unleash that, it's a beautiful thing, again, to how that works with the student.
As you were speaking, it occurred to me, it's so not all Buddhists are Democrats, right? Right. So how does that show up, and is it meaningful in any way, or is it a completely other thing? That's not what happens there.
Is what meaningful?
A person's uh, political inclinations or stances on particular issues, like, not an inclination to support the poor, and
Yeah.
not an inclination to open the doors of opportunities to as many people as
Yeah.
there are.
Yeah.
So
Our Sangha, or community, our Zen center, has people from all different political persuasions.
yeah,
We have people that voted for Trump and people that didn't.
right.
And the classic view of Zen and Buddhism would be, well, nobody with a gun or who voted for Trump would ever be a Buddhist. Well, it's just simply not
It's
true.
not true. Right.
It just is simply not true. And so I think it's really important.
It's kind of wonderful, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. And I think it's really important and wonderful to include those points of view and bring it right out into the open, because you've already created an environment at its best, you've already created an environment of trust and love that allows people to explore deeply who they are and what their fears and hopes and are. And we always stress that this is a safe place to explore these things. So that has to include that cross-pollination of different ideas and beliefs. My first teacher and my current teacher both are really big believers in that, that this is not a practice or a spiritual path just for those of a certain, philosophical or political belief. In fact, it should be just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Should be just the opposite. And I'll tell you a funny. It looks like we still have time. I'll tell you.
You tell me. I mean,
Yeah, a funny story, or at least I think it's a funny story. You decide.
I'll tell you.
But when Lori and I were in New Mexico, we have a really good friend, Jim Woodson, who's a painter and has a studio there out on a high mesa in New Mexico. But he's originally from Fort Worth, Texas. In fact, he splits time, and he's a painter and an art teacher, professor, in Texas. And one, I think for a number of years, was anointed or appointed the Texas state painter, or whatever that would be. So anyway, this is quite a talented guy and a great human being, and probably about as left-leaning as you can get. And so he and his wife Barbara are good friends of ours, and he got a phone call some years ago that went sort of like this. Laura Bush has one of your paintings, and the former president would like to know if you would be his painting instructor. And our friend Jim was kind of taken aback by this request. But he's also a very big-hearted person, and he said, yeah. And so he and the former president have been working together as teacher and student for a number of years now. And this was a few years ago now, but former President George Bush wanted to come out and see Jim's studio in New Mexico. And because of my training and all this talk I do about crossing lines and understanding people, and it's like, how real is that? When I heard he was coming, I just said, I want to meet him.
Absolutely.
And can I meet him? And we just kind of invited ourselves, And Barbara said, well, I don't know, let me check. And so we got vetted by the Secret Service and the whole thing. And we ended up having coffee with President Bush up in the living room of Jim and Barbara's house in New Mexico. And there were 6 of us. There were more Secret Service agents in black SUVs than there were people, all facing outwards, and I don't know. going to be a missile
I'm
strike
sure
or
there's
something. I
something.
don't know. But anyway, we had a lovely breakfast. What happened next was more interesting actually than the breakfast. And you know, my motivation was like, all I know about this man is the stories. I know my political beliefs around what I think he did right or wrong, or the war and this and that. But like, who is he? You know, and so that was my motivation. And we had this breakfast. And unbeknownst to Lori and me, there was a series of pictures taken and then posted on Facebook of our time together. And I don't know, you might even remember that. I don't know if we were connected at that point in time. Anyway, our largely liberal network of friends just attacked. The attack was vicious and brutal.
That is not, sadly, that's not surprising. And it's sad that it's not surprising, but it's not surprising. We have experienced actually not nearly the same. I think Bush could push more buttons than living in Wyoming. Just moving to Wyoming.
Yeah.
The numbers of our friends, well, they were our friends, but the numbers of people who had, it was clear there was something deeply disturbing for them that we could move to this place and be enjoying getting to know people and whatever.
Yeah. And
Why?
finally, so this went on and on. And finally, another friend of ours, who's another educator, is actually a head of school, a guy named Jim Gaines. But he finally wrote and said, "Hey, everybody, this is Dan and Lori."
Good response.
And his next line was beautiful. He said, "I think we can trust them."
Not anymore, said the crowd.
Well, not anymore, because we had a dinner with a friend later, and this friend was like, "We need to talk about this," you know. And it was probably a year later or something, and we had a lovely conversation, and we're still the closest of friends. But it was an interesting conversation, because we need to talk about this, and so we talked about it. And then I said, "Well, do you know that the week before we met with President Bush, the Dalai Lama met with President Bush?" And his friend said,
"That's a good one."
his friend said, "Well, yeah, but he's the Dalai Lama." And I said, "Well, I'm certainly not purporting to be the Dalai Lama,
but I'm aspiring."
But look, well, yeah. But even aside from that, but look at what just happened here.
Yeah.
You know, you just relegated you and me and all of us to our only role is to be fan or spectator.
Yeah.
Okay for the Dalai Lama, because the Dalai Lama is the Dalai Lama and has power or whatever a stance that you can believe in. But for the rest of us, that's a no-go zone, because we're powerless.
Right. And you have to pick a side.
Yeah. And I think it was a really instructive conversation and time there of looking at how people see their own place in this life, and what is your personal power, and are you going to be a spectator? You know, the language I like to use is are you going to be a consumer forever, or do you want to produce? Do you want to produce something in this life, and what is it that you want to produce?
And what is it that you want to produce? Right.
You know, in the classic Buddhist, you know, structure, it's, you know, I want to produce the end of suffering. You know, I think that's a fairly noble endeavor.
I would say both a noble endeavor and a tall order.
And a tall order.
Yeah.
So are you going to consume or do you want to
Yeah.
produce? And what is it that you want to produce? I asked that question of business clients. I asked the question of, people wanting to be leaders that we're training.
Yeah.
Look at this deeply. Are you just going to consume or do you want to produce? And then if so, then where are you producing from and what is it that you want to
Mm-hmm.
produce? And the end of suffering thing, and I'm going to get somewhat personal here, not about you, but about me. That seems really unattainable. That can seem really unattainable or impossible. When my mother died about 6 months ago,
Sorry.
and she had really a rough go of it, and certainly in her later years with both physical and psychological pressures and stresses. And then, I saw her right at the beginning of COVID and then didn't see her again. And then she, died one day. And I had this realization in that week after she died that, first of all, I was angry with her. I was angry with her because I texted a friend and then I looked at my own text and I saw it in the text, right? It went something like a seemingly insatiable desire to suffer.
Your mother.
Yeah.
You were referring to your mother.
Or is it like she had a
Yes.
seemingly insatiable desire to suffer? And I looked at, I ran into my own words a couple of days later. And I realized that I was holding her in a place of suffering with that description. That if you want to talk about heaven or hell, that I could look at her life in a completely different way, is that she did suffer and she didn't know how to get out of it, maybe. But my description of her as willfully, wantonly, forcefully desiring to suffer was actually the creation of a hell for me and for her. And when I saw that and was able to shift my thinking out of that fixed frame, all of a sudden I felt, and this is, in just a week after my mother died, all of a sudden I felt free and light and felt that she was free and light as well, because I had been holding this description of her existence and judging her and getting angry about it. And without doubt, that colored our conversations and communication in the last years of her life, because I always wanted her to see something else.
Right.
I wanted her to be something else.
Right. No.
So that's just an example of, like, it seems like the end of suffering, that's so lofty, yeah, right. But here's, just one really little tangible element of being able to release some suffering for, two souls on the planet.
Yeah, that little piece, and I want to be really clear. I don't, I think goals ought to be lofty.
Yeah.
And so if you had to pick one, and that's a fine one. And the fact that it may be far away, that the finish line might be far away, it doesn't in any way diminish the next instance of diminishing it.
Right.
Yeah. So
it's
it's a perfect, it's sort of a perfect goal.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds incredibly and annoyingly Zen to say, but the finish line is out there, but it's also right under our feet.
Yes,
every
right,
moment.
exactly.
It's like right here, right now.
Right.
Because we can choose right here, right now, how to live the next moment.
That, I had had an experience. Actually, it was the very first year of New Road School,
Mhm.
and we were at the Boys and Girls Club at the time. We rented
Mhm.
the Santa Monica Boys and Girls Club at the time, which is where we started, and this little fellow who was a seventh grader and just a pistol. I mean, he was just a mischievous, fabulous, young, funny, and always, always looking for some trouble. Walking around during lunchtime, because the illusion that we're somehow able to control them.
Yeah.
and and uh, and I walked by him, and this little guy Noah, never forget him. He looks up at me, a little kid, and he's got some sort of quizzical look on his face, and I just was ready for what's the line he's going to come up with something, and it's going to be just perfectly pitched, so it's slightly annoying or slightly wisecracky, but nothing you can get in trouble for because he's a genius at that. And I said, okay, come on, what, just say it, what? And he said, no, I was just wondering, what is it like to have more years behind you than ahead of you? And at first I thought it was just a great line that he was, and then I realized by looking at him is like, oh, this is a real question. So I was hoping he was wrong about the math, but the question was like, it just went right in.
Yeah.
And it was, it's been there it's still there for me, obviously, because I'm saying it to you. It's like, well, what if you really knew that there's more back there than there is here? How would you live? How
Yeah.
would you want to live? And it was transformative in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, so I thank him every day for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And kids are
Well,
great for that. Kids are
yeah,
great for that.
yeah, indeed,
I
indeed.
mean, and not to laud you too much, but I'm going to anyway. I mean, we
Yeah, because
talk
I can
about,
always edit it out.
you can always edit it out, but that moment when Nick was applying to New Roads School, coming from the school he was at, and you invited him in, you were head of school, I think was your title, and you invited him into your office for a one-on-one meeting without us, without anybody else there. And obviously I wasn't in there, but I was present to the young guy walking out of there, and the look on his face and his complete certainty that this was a safe home for him.
Mm.
That you were the end of suffering in that moment.
Mm.
And so we all have that ability all the time.
Yeah.
Because there had been suffering there, and you chose to take a meeting with a kid.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that, but I think it's also just an example of how readily available it actually is.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you want to say before I let you off the hook, as it were? This has been a delight for me.
It's been a delight. I actually have to look at something to answer that question. You can edit out this pause.
Yeah.
It's been such a wonderful and surprising journey, and life.
Mm.
And I'm just profoundly grateful for all of it. And it's, and as I said, it's surprising, but well, we've touched on it. When you are able, as a teacher or a leader or a lover or a friend or a stranger,
Mm-hmm.
to be there at that moment when somebody sees
something,
what a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
What a privilege that is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I don't think that that should be just the province of teachers or priests or leaders or,
No,
I mean, I think that's that privilege is available and to all. And in my work with people, that's really what I hope to help them see,
I think,
because
yeah, go ahead.
ultimately you can't teach this. You're just
No,
you're just kind of
uh,
pointing the way and providing some guidance. But to be present when somebody sees what is possible in their life and in their world and with other people, that is a beautiful thing.
well, I totally agree with that. And it's so funny. Over the years, you know, friends of all sorts who have nothing to do with education and every once in a while the question used to come up. Um, Probably still does, but why education there? You could do so many other, you can like what? And to say to them, it's actually being in those moments, whether it was in the classroom or in the conversation with were the most exhilarating, exciting moments. So, and I've had a lot of adventures in my life that
Yeah.
are, you
Yeah.
know, things that could be in books that were real adventures, real adventures. But that's some of the most incredibly fun, exhilarating, thrilling moments of that. And I think it takes certain people, not that it's not available for everybody, but some people are really drawn to that in ways. Some people experience those moments as so thrilling. And those are the people who may be drawn to go into teach, go to work with leaders, go to be who you are, a Zen priest, whatever that is. Maybe everybody, those moments are probably available to everybody to be there at those moments, but to be touched in the ways that some people are touched. And I know happily I'm addicted to that. I
Yeah.
love that addiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Or maybe we're just lucky to have
yes,
experienced it, and that drives me to share that
yeah,
fortune,
yeah.
because I really do think it's available to all. It's just, but it takes some scrubbing and penetrating to get there. Let me ask you a question. In those
Sure.
exhilarating moments you're talking about,
Yeah.
where are you? Where's David?
Where am I?
Yeah, when you're really in that moment, in that exhilarated state,
Mhm.
where's David?
I'm not sure.
Exactly.
I think I'm right there and not at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what a joyful place that is. you know
Profound and
and
phenomenal.
that is available. I mean, for some people it's like going off the top of a black diamond ski lift, or pulling
Yes.
bow across the violin strings, or
Right.
chopping an onion, or gardening, or
Right.
whatever. And it actually is part of our human experience, and we don't
Yeah.
always see it and
See it that way.
recognize it that way.
Yes.
And so the question is, what if you had ready access to that all the time?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be cool.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, it has been absolutely delightful to be acquainted and reacquainted. And thank you for being willing to spend some time longer than I thought we would speak, and happy that we made the time for this.
Yes, me too. What a joy. And
Yes.
thank you, David.
Yeah. Thank you.